Let's talk about W210 front suspension. For those of you not familiar with these cars, I think you'll find this video interesting, and some of it may actually come as a little bit of a surprise. You may be familiar with the old 123 and 126 front suspension, and then they changed it. In the 201 and 124, they used a strut assembly, but you're looking at the W210, which came after the 124, and you think, man, maybe that's got some sort of exotic front suspension. Maybe it's really hard to work on. Maybe it's something that I can't do myself. Well, you're going to be surprised to learn that this is a front end that you can work on, and it actually is going to be quite familiar to you. Now, this E430 has 150,000 miles on it, and one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect the front suspension. I mean, anytime you have an older Benz that has over 100 or 120,000 miles, you should take a good close look. If you want that Mercedes road feel and you want that tight front end, you need to look at the front suspension, because a lot of times those rubber parts are going to need to be replaced. Now, they had a unique design on the W210 lower control arm bushings that have, they give you a nice soft ride when they're new, but when they get old, they can make that front end move around, and a lot of people have complained about excess tire wear on these chassis. So that's something you have to be particularly concerned about if you do acquire 210. Now, it's not just mileage, it's how the car's been driven. If the car has 120,000 miles and it's all freeway, you may find that the front suspension is really tight. But if the owner lives on a rough road and drives a lot, even on gravel or rough pavement, you're going to find potential front end looseness with a car that maybe only has 80 or 90,000 miles. So you can't totally go by just the mileage alone. You have to know a little bit about the history of the car. I don't know any of the history of this car, so I'm going to just get in here and do a quick inspection. And let me show you some of the things I do just to check some of the control arms and bushings in this car. Well, there's the front suspension. You know, if you're familiar with the old 123 and 126 suspension, you're going to say, wow, that looks more like those suspensions than it does the 124 or the 201 chassis. This is the last Mercedes-Benz with the shock outside coil front suspension. In the 211 chassis, they went back to the strut. And so this, you wonder, well, it's kind of like they went backward, but for some reason, the engineers chose this particular front suspension for the W210. So over here, you're looking at the lower control arm. There's a bushing there and a bushing over there. Those are the bushings that have a tendency to wear out, and when they do, this part will move while you're driving the car. You'll feel movement in the front end, and of course, it will lead to excessive front tire wear. This is the upper control arm with a ball joint, very similar. It's not an aluminum part, it's a steel part, but the design is very similar to the 123 and 126. And notice here where they put the sway bar. They put the sway bar aft of the front suspension, and these bushings right here have a tendency to wear out. The reason they can do that is they went to a different type of steering. It's a rack and pinion. This was Mercedes' first rack and pinion steering, so they did away with the steering box and all the tie rod links that you see on the older models. Now, when you look at this, you think, well, I got to figure out if anything's worn out here. So the only way you can do that is to load the joints, and you can't do that with a tire. Some people think you just grab the tire and kind of move it around, but that doesn't work. Let me show you what I do just to give a quick check on particularly the lower control arm bushings. I prefer using a good pry bar like this to test those bushings and joints. Notice here, this one has a number of different angles to it because you're going to have to get the bar up in there, a couple different positions to pry. And look what I'll do first here. I'm going to go after those lower control arm bushings. I'll put the pry bar in here between the lower control arm and the mounting bracket on the subframe, and then I'm going to push down on it. Whoops, that slipped out. Okay, try it again. All right, give it a good shake like this, and you can see here that we've got quite a bit of movement. I've got over 1/4 inch of movement. So I kind of suspected this because I was seeing some uneven tire wear on this car. Then I'll come up to the top of the upper control arm, check this ball joint in here. I can use the the other end of the other end of the pry bar and get in here, and if there's movement, you'll feel it. Right when you pry on it, you'll feel a little movement in that joint. But this one looks really tight. And then to test the bushings on the inboard part of the control arm where it bolts into the body, I can use this end of the pry bar and get up in there, and I'm going to pry against the inner fender panel, against that bushing housing, and this is real tight. There's no movement on this upper control arm. So I don't think I'm going to have a problem with the upper control arm. I am going to have to replace those lower control arm bushings. And as far as the sway bar bushings concerned, I don't even need to pry on that. I can tell by the rust stain marks here that there's been movement on the sway bars. So we're going to replace those bushings also. So I'm going to take the car, I'm going to get it up on the lift, and I'm going to go through the procedure of replacing these parts. I'm also going to replace the rotors and the brake pads, and we'll do a full series of video workshops on the W210 front suspension, and they will be available on my website in the future.